Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on men's mental health. Today's webinar is being offered by the Behavioral Health Quality Department and Behavioral Health Medical Directors. Today's training will be led by psychiatrist Dr. Subrata Ghosh and licensed clinical social worker Greg Lujan. If you have questions for the presenters, there will be time at the end for questions. Please type your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. All right, Greg, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Christy. As Christy mentioned, my name is Greg Lujan. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a quality management specialist here at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And with me is Dr. Subrata Ghosh, one of our medical directors. Next slide. We'll go ahead and kick things off with a really exciting disclosure form or disclosure statement. I won't torture you by reading the whole thing, but please do take a moment and just peruse it really quickly. And again, this presentation will be made publicly available at the end. A recording of it will be available as well. So if you want to review the disclosure statement and any other material in it after the fact, you'll have access to it. So next slide, please. So kind of laying out the agenda for today, what we're going to talk about. We're obviously here for 1 hour, so we won't be able to have a really comprehensive look at men's mental health, but we'll address certain things in a cursory way. First off, the landscape of men's mental health, just kind of what it all is, some clinical considerations, and we'll talk about patient screening and practice just a little bit. And one of the things that I will kind of be driving home is looking at it through the lens of, or in a snapshot of when someone first has a diagnosis of, say, a substance use disorder, things like opioid use disorders, or when somebody first goes into the hospital for treatment, or into a residential treatment center, that sort of thing. Looking at that critical time where you're handing somebody off to an outpatient, getting somebody scheduled in an outpatient setting. So let's see. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ghosh to talk a little bit about the landscape of men's mental health.
Thank you, Greg. So the question is like, why is mental health important? And really, mental health, it shapes how we experience being human. It influences how we think, how we feel, how we connect with others, how we make decisions and experience the world, right? How we find meaning in life. Now, from the mental health perspective, the main objective really is, to maintain a sense of well-being, how we maintain our good relationships, regulate our emotions, adapt to adversity, and continue to grow despite life's challenges. Now, people approach mental health in different ways, and this is probably influenced by how they understand mental illness, their culture, past experiences, and then resources available. Now, men often approach mental health differently from women, rather than openly, identifying feelings such as sadness, anxiety, being vulnerable. They might be more likely to express distress through being more irritable, angry, isolating, taking risks, that sort of thing. So with this framework in mind, let's look at the broader landscape. How common are these problems? Where the gaps are? What the differences are amongst different generations of men? So we can have the next slide, please. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, thank you. So according to the American and Depression Association of America, in men 18 and older, less than half of them with a mental illness receive treatment. So less than 50% of people who had a mental health issue got treatment. So these are statistics from 2023. Now, men are also less likely to seek mental health care, and when they do come in, the symptoms are often more severe, or they might be in a crisis. So in other words, your mental health, behavioral health conditions are often under-recognized and undertreated. It's not that these issues are less prevalent, it's just that they might not be as visible. So next slide, please. So, what is the impact of untreated mental illness? So, when untreated, it affects our level of functioning, engagement, interest in activities, and how this manifests. It might be poorer performance at work, in school, worse grades, missing work, loss of productivity. So here we see that serious mental illness, defined as bipolar, schizophrenia, psychosis, and major depression, causes upwards of $193 billion in loss of earnings. Now, mental health and physical health are very closely linked. So, for example, like untreated depression could lead to poorer physical health outcomes. So, as an example, there was a study by University of Washington a few years ago where they looked at people with diabetes. So, if there was comorbid depression, these individuals had poorer glycemic control. Their blood sugars weren't managed as well. There's increase in mortality and increase in morbidity and mortality. And on the flip side, when people with diabetes came into the clinic, more than half of them who had depression that wasn't picked up. So these both physical health and mental health illnesses really go hand in hand. The numbers we see now in the clinics. So next slide, please. This is just to give you a few numbers, and this is by the CDC, where they found that 9% of men in the United States experience daily feelings of depression and anxiety. So this is not an occasional bad day. These are consistent feelings that persist day in, day out. And there are differences between age and gender. So in the 18 to 44 age group, stats show that Black and Hispanic men reported fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety than white men. And subsequently also had lower access to treatment. Now on the surface, lower symptoms may not necessarily mean that they're not there. It just might mean that they're not detected. So over a lifetime, it's estimated that 1 in 5 men will actually have a major depressive episode sometime in their lifetime. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is like an important aspect of probably the most serious consequence of untreated depression, which is suicide. So on the left, you see that men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And so in the graph, you see the trends from 2001 to 2021. Actually, men, it's kind of trending up over time. And then the other aspect is that if someone has attempted suicide, the risk of a future attempt is up to 3-fold. Now, in men in the 18 to 35 age group, suicide is actually the leading cause of death. So untreated depression is a very serious issue. Next slide, please. So we touched on depression and anxiety. Another important aspect of men's mental health is substance abuse. Men are 2 to 3 times more likely to meet criteria for a substance use disorder than women. So that these diagnoses come about when someone wants to stop drinking or using drugs, but they cannot. There's impaired control over their use. They spend a lot of time seeking substances. There's social impairment. They're using despite its impacts in their life, their social interactions, family life, work. And substance abuse and mental health are closely intertwined. Substance use disorders can lead to mood disorders, for example, and vice versa. Someone with depression, we've heard the term self-medicating. Someone with depression might use substances to try and feel better. So whenever assessing men, it's important to assess not only the psychiatric symptoms, but also the substance abuse issues. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. So I want to talk a little bit about traditional masculinity's impact and kind of what generally masculinity is and has been kind of throughout our history. We talk about traditional in masculinity. I think if we boil it down to an essence, I think the ability, I think, of men to compartmentalize and delay feelings to get a task done, I think, is probably one of the most central aspects of traditional masculinity. The ability to go out and hunt and stand next to other men and make sure that we don't get arrested by emotion, that we don't, we don't stop and feel while everybody is in danger. And while things that are happening that need one's physical attention of the physical body, building something huge, hunting bison. I know we don't all hunt bison anymore, but that still remains one of the most attractive thing about men. One of the most appealing thing about men is that we have that ability to do it. And of course, anything. There does come a time when it is toxic to do that too much. One of the favorite quotes I've heard is from a dietitian talking about toxicity is determined by dose, not by substance. So salt, for instance, a little bit of salt, a pinch of salt on your steak is going to make it taste fantastic, right? Some salt in your broth, some salt in your food. You need a little bit of salt in your diet to keep yourself healthy, but 4 or 5 tablespoons of salt in a glass of water and you will get very sick. And masculinity and all traits in excess are of course going to become toxic. They're going to become dangerous. They're going to become hurtful. And so healthy emotional expression for boys and men, it comes learned from other men, and it comes learned from society how we socialize boys and men to do that, to belay their emotions, and how much to do it, and when to do it is, I think, the hardest part for young men to learn. And so men may cope through distraction, social isolation, and substance use or overwork. When we don't know how to cope with emotions or feelings, we will tend to lean on things that are more physical or more distractive or more dissociative. Men, of course, are expected to be strong and prioritize their self-worth and value as being the primary caregiver, someone who comes and brings something physical or something tangible to the world. Pardon me. Pardon me. And of course, the world does have changing needs. There isn't as much need for hunting. There isn't as much need for building large monuments or large things, as we have better machines and better tools, and as we just don't hunt, we just don't do as much physical activity anymore. So there is a changing need for men to be able to learn to manage feelings and stay in the feeling space a little more now than there used to be. Next slide. So a little bit more about the traditional masculinity's impact. According to the CDC, stigma might reduce treatment engagement, leading to delays in seeking or discontinuing care. Men don't want to. It's uncomfortable, I think, a lot of times in being in a feeling space as a man, almost akin to writing with your non-dominant hand. If you're right-handed trying to write with your left hand, you can do it, but you're not that deft at it. You're not that good at it, and it doesn't come out all that good. Men are more likely to be diagnosed with externalized mental health disorders, things like substance use disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, conduct disorder in youth, versus things like internalized mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, eating disorders that women get diagnosed with more frequently. it's kind of a fact of our it's kind of a fact of psychology, that we tend to express our dysfunction in ways that are available to us. So those are ways in which society makes it available for men to express disorder, to express difficult feelings, and we're better at it. We're just better at externalizing. Um, and things like preventative health and primary care services are underutilized by men. So that's the kind of thing that you want to consider when planning for somebody's discharge from a hospital, or their first diagnosis with a substance use disorder. That things like men are less likely to have more annual exams and are more likely to delay treatment because it's serious. So you need to kind of you need to get them scheduled and moving as quickly as possible. Next slide. And now Dr. Ghosh is going to talk about some clinical considerations.
Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so so this slide, I just wanted to kind of highlight, that psychiatric illnesses or mental health illnesses are really brain-based. Okay, mental health problems and substance use problems. Things like the symptoms that we recognize clinically, mood, motivation, perception, behavior, emotional regulation. These are all like functions of the brain. So when we talk about mental health problems or diagnoses, these are not signs of weaknesses, or they're not personal shortcomings that can be managed by trying harder or being tougher. Just like we would not treat diabetes by being tougher, we don't treat depression by just being tougher, right? These are brain-based illnesses. So the brain is an organ, just much like any other organ in the body. But the difference is that the brain is kind of a complex organ. It's very complex, and the development of the brain starts in utero and goes till the mid-20s. So the brain is still developing during adolescence and early adulthood. Adolescence is one of the most important periods of neurodevelopment, and it's also a time when most psychiatric disorders first become clinically apparent. So I just want to highlight one thing. Okay, say in depression, there are three brain regions that have been implicated: depression and anxiety: the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and the striatum. The amygdala is the center where we process fear. The ventral striatum is the brain reward center. So when we anticipate or experience something pleasurable, the ventral striatum lights up. When we experience fear, the amygdala lights up. And these two brain regions mature earlier than the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is like the CEO of the brain. It kind of oversees everything, helps us with decision making, with planning. So in adolescence, the amygdala and ventral striatum are mature, functioning away. They're feeling all these emotions and risk-taking behaviors, but the prefrontal cortex isn't developed to control that yet. So it's interesting that this is the time when a lot of the psychiatric illnesses arise. So we can think of the adolescent brain as a car. So the emotional and reward systems, the amygdala and the striatum, are like the gas pedal. So they become highly active and responsive during adolescence. The prefrontal cortex is like the brakes, helping with judgment, impulse control, and emotional regulation. So the gas pedal develops first, and the brakes are not working yet. Over time, the brakes do develop, but there's a period of time where we might see more impulsive behaviors, risk-taking, and things of that nature. Now, in men, the brain kind of develops a bit more slowly compared to females. So that might be one aspect to take in mind. Now, these are not absolute. It's not that you compare one male and one female and their brains different. But this is as a group. There's some differences and a lot of individual variations. Genetics influences brain development. The environment influences brain development. So during adolescence, the brain is highly adaptable. um, which it's both good and bad. So like um, it, it makes the brain more vulnerable, but also there's an opportunity to mold the brain and help with treatment. So early identification of symptoms, appropriate treatment, reduction of environmental stresses, things like childhood abuse, bullying, stress, substance use. These can all impact the brain more during adolescence than it does later on. So, there are opportunities during adolescence to help improve mental health. So it highlights the importance of detecting symptoms earlier. The other thing about testosterone, um, so in men, the testosterone that circulates in our body, it reaches a peak around the second and third decades in life, and then gradually decreases after that. So in older men who have a, documented low testosterone levels, like supplementing with testosterone might be indicated. It can help with overall sexual function, skeletal muscle mass, strength, power, and modestly improve depressive symptoms. So in someone with depression, in an older man with depression, who has a documented low testosterone level, it might be reasonable to try that. But testosterone on its own is not like an indicated treatment for depression. So next slide, please. So as you mentioned, men are less likely to seek mental health care. And when they do come in, they might not express the typical symptoms that we would normally see in depression. Feelings, sad, crying spells, things of that nature. So they come in later, and when they come in, the symptoms might be different and more severe. So we have a list of a few of the common clues that someone might have a mental health kind of issue going on. They might be more angry, more irritable, you're drinking more, taking more risks. So, when someone engages in high risk activities or use substances or like spending a lot of time in sports and gaming and gambling, these are all, in a way, attempts to increase the pleasure, to make the ventral striatum light up so that they feel some sense of pleasure. But anyway, there might be physical symptoms, there might be headaches, GI problems, and of course, most importantly, thoughts of suicide. And then when evaluating men, not only do we want to look at these symptoms for clues, evaluation of substance abuse is also very important. The next slide, please. Yeah, Greg, I think this is yours.
Yes, sorry about that. I was having trouble getting my camera back on and finding it on my thing. So we're going to talk about some generational considerations for different. There are different generations have different needs, different understandings of the world. And so it's important to kind of talk about some, and we'll kind of go from youngest to oldest here. First, I want to talk about Generation Z. Pardon me. That's kind of our 14 to 29-year-olds, defined as the 14 to 29-year-olds currently born between 1997 and 2012. These are kids who have grown up. They've never not known the internet to be a reality, so they have grown up in a world with a lot of information always available to them, and a lot of competing attention, a lot of competition for their attention. These are kids who have often in school have had social emotional learning curriculums in school. They're kids who have been told, and for whom it has been normalized, that therapy is a thing. People go to therapy. It's not so they're going to be a little bit more comfortable with the concept of therapy. They're going to be, and they might be treatment savvy. They might have been in therapy before. It might have just been a part of their life as they've grown. They could also be information avoidant. We'll talk about that a little bit. And these are kids who were, during their formative years, were stuck at home during the pandemic and may have been out of school for some time, or may have, of course, had learning at home for some time. And they do tend to spend a little more time at home and a little less time in person, um, seeing each other. Um, let's see, again, they've had normalized, they may have had prior therapy. You, for follow-up, you can be direct with them, generally speaking. They will often know a lot about treatment. You can just say, here's what the plan is, here's the treatment, and they'll be a little more comfortable. Or you may encounter them being a little more comfortable. I can't say, for sure every one of them. Let's see. And again, they are digital natives. They've spent a lot of time video gaming. They've spent a lot of time on their phones. They've spent a lot of time on the computer. Um, and they're careful. They can be pretty careful about it, is what I've found as a father of two Gen Z kids myself. My own kids and a lot of their cohort friends are particular about their I hate to say it this way, but their brand, their social media presence, what they appear to be to the entire world, because these are kids whose pictures have been on Facebook since they were babies. So the entire world has had access to their own upbringing. Pardon me. So my own kids in particular, and their friends in general, may want tighter control over their social media presence. They may even tell you, I don't want my picture on your Instagram, I don't want my picture on your Facebook, or please ask me first. So showing respect to them in abundance is pretty important to them. They could also be information avoidant when overwhelmed. Again, this is a generation that has always had the entire information of the entire world at their access their whole lives. And what impact that has on us, it's we're kind of in a frontier, in an information frontier. So when they're overwhelmed, they might just be avoidant. So when dealing with overwhelming emotions, they might tend to avoid input or data, which might manifest in things like remembering appointments. Or so if they're provided a packet at discharge, that might not be really good for them. It's a whole thick package that they might not want to look at. It might be too much information. So simple discharge packets might be important. Using a teach back method, providing quick visuals for them, or like a mini calendar, or warm handoffs to another provider when possible. We mentioned that these were kids of the pandemic. And so they might have, and then they missed some formative years with each other, and which is really precious time, any sort of in-person time with each other. So they might have increased anxiety and depression. They might have decreased and maintained low substance use disorders, which is kind of a bright spot, right? I mean, we have observed that Generation Z kids are drinking less as they kind of get older into drinking age, and lower substance uses, which is, it's kind of nice. We're, yay us, we're doing a good job at least at that. They're exhibiting some less risk-taking behaviors, but they have higher mental health service needs. And getting back to the digital presence thing, this is also a generation that, and this blew my mind to think about. It's a generation that when they go to things like a school dance, something as simple and traditional as that we think of as just a part of youth, they know that if they go, like a young man might go to ask a girl to dance, he has to do that with a full awareness that he might be being recorded and that it might be put on the internet. It's fair game. If you do it in public, you might be put, the entire world might be able to see you go ask this girl to dance, get rejected by this girl, or record you dancing even. So kids are even reluctant to do things like dance in public at a prom. So things to keep in mind when dealing with Generation Z. They do spend more time at home and with family, and so their family is their key support system, even beyond age 18. Also, kind of financially, in the world that we live in, it's a little bit difficult for kids to launch. So kids are staying home. kids are living at home a little bit longer these days. And so that may be, knowing that the family is involved and knowing that the family is part of the thing may be something that you consider when doing follow-up appointments and doing therapy, doing treatment. They may even bring their parents to therapy um, to kind of support. Next slide. Oh, pardon me, my alarm is going off. Sorry about that. Millennials. These are 28 to 43-year-olds born between 1981 and 1996. This is that generation, the first generation that really came into the digital age, saw the invention of the internet, and kind of saw a lot of rapid advancement with information and technology. They weren't necessarily born with the internet, always having the internet, but they saw it pretty quickly and pretty early in their lives. They tend to be actionable and concise. You tend to want to be actionable and concise with them. You want to reframe treatment as well-being. Think about flexible scheduling and telehealth, and I'll talk a little bit more about these. Provide digital follow-up information options because they are tech savvy, and you may want to include parents in scheduling. This was a very intentionally parented generation. They do tend to have high rates of depression and anxiety. Millennials tended to be pretty disillusioned with the world that they saw. I think they feel a lot like the world that they were promised and the world that they encountered might be two different things. They were parented by Gen Xers like myself and slightly older kind of baby boomers. And there's this, I think we all kind of experience this wonderful tension between millennials and baby boomers, and talking about the different worlds that they actually lived in and they expect each other to understand. They tend to have a lot of work stress, financial strain, and burnout. They are more likely to seek therapy, similar to Gen Z. They do use alcohol, increase a little more than Gen Z did, to cope, and they may have a lot of competing responsibilities. Millennial men show higher rates of depression and anxiety compared to previous generations of men the same age, so they are a little more feelings oriented. They're again a generation that may have been taught social emotional learning in school, and of course, this is, where boys aren't as good at it as girls. It's caused some difficult tension for this generation. Despite their destigmatization of mental health, the men are still less likely to seek mental health treatment, even when they're symptomatic, as stigma around emotional vulnerability does still persist, more so with this generation, although less so than previous generations like Generation X or the great generation, baby boomers. Pardon me. When it comes to follow-up, a structured, actionable, and concise approach with the use of bullet points. Again, this is a generation that didn't necessarily have the internet at a very young age, but pretty quickly had to learn to take in a lot of information really quickly and sort through it and figure out what's what. So the use of bullet points might help. Clear next steps or teach back method again for discharge plans will help with follow-up with them. You want to reframe treatment around performance, sleep, and long-term health. Thinking about therapy as holistic. The men tend to respond better to well-being and functioning rather than emotional appeals when encouraging follow-up and treatment. This is a generation that was told, if you're not making it financially, you just need to work harder. You need to get a second job. And they kind of took it to heart. And there's been a lot of tension between them and prior generations about it. But they experience high levels of work-related stress, financial strain, and burnout, which is often tied to job instability. This is a generation that, whereas prior generations This is a generation that has known that it will never be able to settle into one job with one company in one career and work your entire life with that one job. They've always known that their resume, their skills and abilities is what carries them from job to job to job to maybe even career to career to career, because things move so quickly informationally and technology moves so quickly that the world we live in doesn't really allow for that that thing that prior generations had where you were able to collect a pension from your company and kind of stay in one place. They may also have a lot of student loan debt, and there may be a lot of economic pressure. The cost of college for this generation skyrocketed. Um, Many millennials report declining social network and increased loneliness. Part of that is just the age that they're in now. Um, but part of it is also the loneliness I think that we all know and understand and feel in the digital age. We have so much more information and so much more connection to each other, but it all happens through a little phone as opposed to in person. We get so much information about each other that we don't need to catch up with each other in person when we see each other at the supermarket or somewhere. When following up with these guys, you want to schedule a follow-up. You consider their stress and availability and the need for flexibility. You don't want to add to their work-related stress. You want to prioritize providers that have more flexible scheduling, things like after hours or weekends, and telehealth options to offset the difficulty. These are people who will tend to be a little more comfortable using telehealth, using digital therapy. Um, Getting back to the pandemic, millennial men do show elevated post-pandemic alcohol use and high rates of stress-related drinking. I think we did mention that before. So paying attention to how substance use treatment works with this generation is important. They don't necessarily identify stress-related alcohol use as a problem until there's some sort of functional impairment. So there's nothing wrong with me drinking as long as there's nothing wrong with me. And again, I mentioned digital follow-ups. Text reminders might be helpful. They've helped with the best follow-up rates for this generation. And just to remember that they may have competing responsibilities. They're of childbearing age now, and so they might be having to balance raising kids and caring for aging parents. This is a generation that has been taught a little more that men are involved in childcare, men are involved in elder care, and they are learning it. So these men may have a lot of competing responsibilities, especially if they are still kind of called upon to be that primary caregiver as well, or primary breadwinner as well. Although that tends to be somewhat less so with this generation. So they may have increased at home duties, leading to prioritizing family responsibilities over their own follow-up care and treatment. So just remember that they might have the competing responsibilities when doing follow-up stuff. Next slide. Okay, Generation X, my generation. I'm really fascinated by my own generation. Go figure. We're 46 to 61-year-olds, born generally between 1965 and 1980. This is a generation that, might have increased substance use and related health issues, just with our age and as wear and tear kind of wear and tear catches up with us. We are a generation that went through a lot of culture change in a very short period of time. Culturally, my generation saw punk rock and disco and the Satanic Panic and all kinds of musical changes and fashion changes and just cultural changes, the sexual revolution, and just all these things happened in these two or three decades where we were spending our formative years, right? And so we also are the first generation that was told that we were going to make less money than our parents. And so this generation can tend to be a little disillusioned and cynical and withdrawn. And and it's kind of where you see that tension between the millennial generation and the baby boomers, that our generation that we're parenting these millennials and are parenting these Gen Z kids kind of got overpassed, and we kind of have a real like step back and not get involved in the fray kind of a thing. We have our own weird stuff to figure out and deal with. So again, there's a decrease in likelihood of behavioral health treatment because we may be kind of stuck in some older ways. We may need to seek alternative services. Alternative services tend to be kind of bigger for people of my age, of Gen X. We are the first generation that really saw the widespread use of psychotropic medications. We saw a lot of advancements in things like Prozac and the the antidepressants. So some things that there is an increase with this generation in substances and substance use related health issues. Most generations have seen a decrease in substance use in the 50s, but this generation saw an increase. And not just alcohol, but a lot of other substances. We again were referred to as the neglected or forgotten generation. So trauma may be unrecognized and untreated, and self-medication through substance use might be the biggest reason that we seek treatment. Due to an age increase in physical health is further complicated by substance use and vice versa. There is a decreased likelihood of seeking therapy. Compared to younger generations, we are less likely to seek mental health treatment and less likely to identify symptoms. It is still pretty stigmatized for us. We are more willing to seek alternative services over behavioral health treatment. So we're more likely to use alternative services for mental health problems, including things like acupuncturists, chiropractors, massage therapists, herbalists, support groups, whether online or in person, self-help groups, spiritual or religious advisors, or telephone hotlines. Again, we saw a lot of things that changed culturally very quickly. And so we're kind of really open to a lot of different types of therapy. And we're going to be, generally speaking, accepting of psychotropic medications over inpatient or outpatient treatment. Follow-up care considerations. You want to consider a collaborative care model, referring to a PCP or office or clinic that can provide care after discharge is helpful. There's an increase due to the increased risk of health-related issues. You want to do that. And our general decreased likelihood of traditional therapy. You for sure want to screen for substance use disorders, as there is an increase and not a decrease in this generation's use. You want to consider drug abuse screening tests like the DASS-10, the audit, the CAGE questionnaire, or the CAGE aid. Use of brief therapy approaches to increase the likelihood of continual attendance, as we talked about kind of generally with men and with this generation. There's going to be this, we're going to try 5 sessions and let's see how that works. And then maybe we'll try 5 sessions after that. We'll reassess after every discrete period that we agree upon. That way it doesn't feel like an open-ended lifelong thing, because it may not be. And again, you want to emphasize medication management with this age and integrated care, because there may be a lot of health issues or some health issues that are burgeoning with this age. Next slide. And my apologies to the baby boomers and silent generation people out there for lumping them together, but we're going to lump them together. Baby boomers tend to be 62 to 80-year-olds born between 1946 and 1964. And 80-plus-year-olds born between 1928 and 1945. And this is that elder generation that grew up in a world, a simpler time, so to speak. It grew up in a world that wasn't digital and had to learn to be digital a little later in life. And had to learn to deal with a big flood of information and a lot of that cultural change we talked about. They saw it all happen as adults and as parents. So they may be really rejecting of technology. They may be really rejecting of a lot of information and have trouble dealing with a lot of information coming at them all at once. This generation has a very high suicide risk. They may, due to age, may have a lot, and due to kind of harder living, more difficult living, have more chronic health conditions. They have very low mental health utilization, and this is the generation that really does fall prey to stigma about mental health, substance use treatment, mental health treatment. It's had to deal with it only very reluctantly. So they may also have unrecognized substance use disorders. As I mentioned, they do have a high suicide risk. 75 and older has the highest risk of the suicide rate, and 3 times higher, which is 3 times higher than the national average. Older men are especially at risk of suicide if they're widowed or divorced, or they're living alone or in a nursing home, or have a history of anxiety, depression, and have a lost sense of dignity and control. And this is that generation that all men, generally speaking, are going to have this thing where if we don't have a sense of purpose, if we're not providing something, if we're not creating something, if we're not making something tangible or giving something, we have a loss of a sense of our own identity, of our own worth, of our own purpose. And that is really kind of what cuts to the essence of maleness, and loneliness, and what am I here for if I'm not giving something to the world? So this really, particularly as men get older, it's something to pay particular attention to. How does an older man, how do we as older men, as we're aging, find purpose and meaning when it's no longer what we're giving to our children, what we're giving to others? There may be things like chronic health conditions. So having conditions like heart disease, stroke, or cancer that cause depressive symptoms, or medications that have depressive side effects. They make it harder to identify depression itself versus some sort of medication induced, or what's induced by physical illness, or what is depression. They may be living with chronic illness, or they may have comorbid medical or neurological issues that increase their suicide risk. Again, low mental health utilization. This is the least likely among all generations to seek therapy and medication for mental health. These are people who were taught that you tough it out, that you be tough, that you just grit your teeth and bear through it. You get a second, third job. And that's what will pay dividends. They were taught that they weren't just taught, but they were shown by society that you can just add a third or a second or a third job, and that is what will lead to success, as opposed to younger generations where that's not really the case necessarily. SAMHSA data shows lower treatment utilization in men among about over 60. A strong cultural stigma rooted in generational norms around stoicism, independence, and handling it yourself. Has caused a lot of behavioral health conditions to go untreated among this generation. Pardon me. Substance use disorders tend to go unrecognized and untreated, but are, of course, rising among this population. There's a tendency for providers and others to think that they're unwilling to seek treatment or services, so recommendations might not be made or heavily encouraged. So we can understand that this generation doesn't necessarily speak the language of treatment, but let's not let that become a stereotype. Smaller amounts of therapy might have a bigger effect, so less quantity and time might be spent using therapy services. Again, as I talked about, that get them into treatment early, within 7 days. Get them at least 1 or 2 appointments within 30 days. But understand that it's not a good idea to present things as open-ended. You're always going to be in therapy. There may be a lot of social disconnectedness and inactivity due to age. So social and interpersonal problems may not be as transparent. They might not be interacting and dealing with people, so it may go unrecognized that they have trouble with that, when that's the issue. Individuals with chronic pain, sleep issues, and depression and anxiety, they might use substance to treat these conditions. In terms of follow-up care, safety planning is really important. Be direct with depression in this generation. Review medications, make sure you assess for their access to firearms and high-risk items. You want to monitor them for social isolation and functional loss. Since older adults rarely self-initiate care, a direct provider-to-provider transition is very helpful and will help increase the likelihood of a follow-up. Putting a personal touch on follow-up care is important. And again, this population is the most avoidant to traditional therapy. So if you reframe it to think about words like a health follow-up or adjustment support, wellness, recovery coaching instead of therapy, that might help integrate non-stigmatizing supports. And also alongside spiritual counseling or senior center wellness groups, grief recovery groups, that sort of thing. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Ghosh.
Okay, thanks, Rick. So this is like, when we see patients in the clinic, some of the ways that we can kind of quickly screen for some of these issues. Next slide, please. So these are some validated, quick screening tools that can be used as a part of the routine workflow. So we can group these into buckets: substance abuse, anxiety, and depression. So the CAGE questionnaires, so CAGE, there are 4 questions in the CAGE. 1C is for cut down. Has anyone told you to cut down your drinking? A, have you felt annoyed by criticism? G, have you felt guilty about drinking? And E, have you ever needed an eye opener in the morning? So that's the CAGE alcohol questionnaire. The CAGE 8 is adapted to include substance abuse as well. So similar questions, but it includes substance use, illicit drug use. And then for anxiety, we have, the GAD-7 is a 7-item questionnaire where you ask questions related to anxiety, and the person rates them on a scale. But there's a shorter form, the GAD-2, which is like a quick screen. It's just 2 questions. Questions are like, over the last 2 weeks, have you ever been bothered by the following? 1, feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. And 2, not being able to stop or control your worrying. So if there's a positive response in the GAD-2, then you can go to the GAD-7. Similarly, for depression, we have the PHQ-9, which is the 9-item screen for depression. But there's a short form, which is just 2 questions, and the same format as the GAD-2. Over the last 2 weeks, have you been bothered by like little pleasure or little interest or pleasure in doing things? And the second question is feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. So if there's a positive response to PHQ-2, then you can go to the PHQ-9. So really, these are like short, low friction validated tools. They can be done like within a couple of minutes during patient visits. Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Okay, so just really quickly to kind of recap, things like patient engagement. We've talked about most of these, but just to kind of recap some of them. With men generally, it's helpful to think about use of informal, culturally appropriate language and direct discussion. Beat around the bush a little less, be a little bit more direct, although you kind of have to do that sensitively because men tend to have a lot of stigma about treatment, or more so than women might. You want to encourage and consider the patient's story and experiences. There's no substitute ever. No framework or anything like that can take the place of getting somebody's story and relating to them personally and getting to know somebody and building that trusting relationship. With men, it might be a good strategy when getting their story to start out by focusing on the what happened, what occurred, what do you see, what do you think, and then kind of inch into talking about feelings. What does that mean? How, and then kind of work on how do you feel? What does it mean when you do this? What does it mean when you say that? And then how does it feel kind of comes after that. You kind of have to go a little bit slower before talking about feelings with men. And again, build trust in a collaborative provider relationship, and focus on treatment that is collaborative and action oriented, and solution focused. What's going to work here? What's going to help? What is a good plan for this? With older generations, it might be helpful to speak in more professional language, not quite as relaxed, not quite as informal. They, older generations will expect you to be more of an expert. Show your education, show your expertise, and that'll help engender trust with them. Whereas with younger generations, you want to relate more person to person, and engender trust through displaying that they know what therapy is and they know how it works, and they can be the experts on themselves. With people of different cultures, I would say that it's best to speak more formally and respectfully until invited to speak less formally and respectfully. And again, with men, give direct suggestions, ask for thoughts, not feelings at first, and their ideas about the plan. Next slide. Some practice considerations. You want to make sure you understand what prompted the patient to seek treatment. Concretely outline the next steps and expectations. Use a strengths-based approach and emphasize that coming to treatment is a success and a sign of strength and courage. Really helping men to understand how and identify within themselves how difficult it is just to expose oneself and be vulnerable, and stay in a vulnerable spot. And again, you want to dip into that vulnerable spot, make it a successful interaction, and be able to pull out of it kind of deftly and quickly, so that things don't feel like an abyss of feelings, like this deep well of feelings that's never going to go away. Use evidence-based practice guidelines, of course. The American Psychological Association has a good one, the Psychological Practice with Boys and Men. And of course, consider your own continuing education, with seminars like this, that sort of thing, to improve your population-specific knowledge. Challenging traditional masculinity myths to improve care. Again, you want to reframe help seeking. You want to improve mental health literacy, help men learn to speak the language of feeling, help men learn to speak the language of what their deficits are. You want to build targeted support, and with peer support, that men may be lacking peer support and have those relationships. I am as guilty of this as any other men. We don't really do a good job of maintaining good social relationships. Men very stereotypically will have a best friend that they haven't spoken to in 5 years, get together with that friend, because he needs help moving or building something, and it'll be like we never saw, we never were apart for a minute, but in that 5 years that we just haven't spoken. So building peer support is really pretty important with men, and encouraging them too, of course. We'll get to questions in well, we may have time for one question, and I have one written down that we'll talk about here. But you will get the access to this video and or this presentation, and along with it, oh, sorry, next slide. I keep forgetting to say to the next slide. Next one, please. Thank you. So there are some QR codes to some helpful member videos that might be helpful with you as well. So you will have access to those, and they have Spanish captions that are available with those. And I've left us very short on questions, but I do want to address one. the question that came in the chat. I'm dealing with young male adults of Gen Z who have not yet developed any levels of patience or built up tolerances and expect immediate gratifications, as well as unrealistic expectations of success and money. Much of this due to social media influencers and also immediate answers given via the internet, i.e. Chat GPT. How do we work with retraining the mind or developing tolerance and patience needed in this generation? Um, I'm going to say that it's probably no different from any other generation that has, boys have always had that problem and boys have always had that issue. Although dealing with social influencers, one has to remember and one has to reteach this generation through our own understanding of the lens of television, right? And advertising. Television is and has always been a vehicle to advertising, as are social media influencers. At the end of every influencer's video, there's going to be a funnel to some sort of financial platform or something like that. Help them learn to be a little bit more media savvy and tech advertising savvy, understanding that influencers wouldn't be telling them this if they didn't want to sell them something. I apologize that we're running short on time. Thank you all for attending.
I thank you, Greg and Dr. Ghosh, for a great presentation. Appreciate everyone joining today. You will receive an email link to complete an evaluation and attestation for today's CME and CEU 24 hours after the end of this presentation. If you'd like a copy of the slide deck, you can also download a copy of today's deck at the same site that you receive your CME and CEU credits. So thank you all again. We hope you have a wonderful Wednesday.